So he got a really good contacts in the 60s, mid to late 60s, 1960s, and we had the best of European cinema, and world cinema, and the best of American cinema. You know, you got John Cassavetes stuff came out. So I was living in a kind of extremely sort of creative atmosphere from that festival. We talk about the films and we, know of them. So I was in a sense not thinking about the social situation or anything else. It was just movies.
And did you find that coming from Australia, that whenever you traveled outside your country, you felt like you were a fish out of water? And do you feel like this feeling had a big impact upon the stories that you portray on the screen?
A fish out of water is a horrible thought. Flapping on the floor. No, I was a fish in water, but I just had to have a travelling tank. I think this sort of artistic personality, if I can call it that, which is not necessarily a virtue, it's just a type of person. It doesn't mean you make good things, but if you have that kind of personality, and you do find a métier for your talent, if you have it, you have to have it, then I don't think you really entirely belong anywhere. You could move, I'm always fond of thinking of, Van Gogh as a Dutchman, but he was a long way from Holland, and he did his Dutch pictures, but the one we know are painted in France. There are many instances of artists who've needed to travel after a period in working in their home country. I think I took a long time to become comfortable in Australia. I think I felt European from that first 20-year-old lad travelling in Europe, hitchhiking after the ship. I slept one night in a field in Spain, I remember, and I had in those days you could hitchhike without problems. Studenti? Yes, si, studenti, And you'd have your bottle of wine and your loaf of bread and your sleeping bag, and you'd stop sometimes in the countryside, stop. Yeah, thank you, gracias. Get up, look around, go and sleep up there under the tree, have your wine, eat bread, look up like that. And one night it was like Eureka for me. I'm a European. My family had been Scottish, Irish, or Scottishman, 2 generations. But I thought, this is where I belong. And then went to see England, and I didn't get to Scotland that trip, but didn't feel I belonged there. So it wasn't like I was English. I was just European. So over the years, in the background, this may have worked its way into some films, not feeling quite comfortable in a way, or not settled anywhere. I think some of that came out in living dangerously. Now it's gone, so I'm very comfortable in my country and love it.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience working on a set, on a Ken Russell set in London?
Yes, I got a grant and went back in 1971, so I'd been back in Australia, made those little films, worked at the television station, and I got a grant from the Experimental Film Fund to go to Europe and spend time on feature film sets. So there I was on Ken Russell's set, assigned to the special effects department, physical effects. Ollie was my boss, to spend a couple of weeks, and they were shooting, Ken Russell shooting The Boyfriend. Very lavish sets in the studio of the 1920s filmmaking. And Twiggy was in the cast. And Ken Russell, for fun, had dressed like those days with the breeches, and he had a riding crop that he would hit on his leg, where I was giving directions. So Ollie and I arrived on, and here was I, wide-eyed from Australia, my God. And what a fascinating thing. And then suddenly there was a shout, "Oh, hey, special effects." What is it? He had to hurry over to the director. He hit his riding crop, which had a head of a dog on it. And it was in ivory, and the dog head broke off the whip. So he said, the AD said, "You boys take this to the workshop, fix the governor's whip. So he left this beautiful set to go to the workshop, put the glue on the head. And Ollie said, "We'll be here half a day, mate. We can go to the pub." And I said, "But I want to go back to the set." He said, "No, you don't." Anyway, weeks passed elsewhere.
As a young filmmaker, who did you admire the most?
I think influences creeping in. It began in a script. All sorts of people influenced me. Jacques Tati, for example, younger. I loved his Monsieur Hulot. Then I was terribly interested in Nick Rogue at one point, and then Roman Polanski, and then towering above them was the Colossus of Stanley Kubrick, I think. And so I just was fascinated with what he was doing, and it was like a, I don't know, unique kind of experience, because he seemed to destroy the wall between art and what we then called commerce. There was a very, even sometimes snobbish view of a commercial film, which unfortunately implied that the people who went to it were stupid, the public. And there was an elitism about art house films, some of them bad films, but they were spoken of with reverence. And you should not cross the line. That would be considered a betrayal, and you will be dismissed and shunned. Stanley Kubrick had no barriers, no wall. And he, I remember the phrase, I think it was Beethoven said, "Oh, I embrace you, ye thousands," or something. And so Stanley Kubrick, like Beethoven, seemed somehow to embrace the millions. And he did, and yet didn't cheapen his work. This was high art, I think. He always took subjects which were very simple in their core, but that was important. So he was my, carried a light into the darkness for me.
Can you please tell us a little bit about your first big break in Hollywood?
To do the whole film in 15 minutes. And they said, "Well, I can see the picture better," said Jeff, "than the script." And I made some changes in it, which I then put into the script. But so successful was it that when I came to do Dead Poets Society with Jeff, he said, "I want to invite you to dinner and for you to tell me the story." So that's how I began. It was my show, it was my film, and they were financing it, and so I launched off into that world wonderfully, and then took the picture to cut in Australia. From then it was always get in, shoot it, go home. Keep America foreign, keep it strange. I didn't want to become too familiar with it, because if I did, I felt I'd lose something. I didn't want to become too familiar with it, because if I did, I felt I'd lose something. So coming back to these actors, Harrison was taking a risk. He had not been successful as an actor outside of these enormous hits of Star Wars and Raiders. But when he tried a few drama roles, he was a little self-conscious, or he wasn't, the films hadn't worked. But he wanted to roll the dice again and try something else. So when you work with a movie star, I realized, who is going to take a risk rather than be conservative to protect their stardom, it's a very exciting, because together you are going to take this risk. And he depends on you, and you depend on him. And then I had that happen with Robin Williams and with Jim Carrey. Similar situations with their differences, but it's exciting. The worst situation would be to be with a star who was deeply conservative and fearful of losing what they had.
What do you think these types of actors who are not trained as dramatic actors, or they're comedians, what do you think they can bring to these types of roles?
Well, it's the very quality that made them a star. The camera likes to look at them, you know, in the case of Harrison. I mean, I think it's ideal if you have both, if you had, you know, the star power and training. I always love that quote of Ingmar Bergman, and they said, "Oh, Mr. Bergman, you've discovered so many actors." And he said, "No, I haven't. I always chose highly professional theatre actors. It's the best way," which I think is true. But nonetheless, you know, the camera loves certain faces. And I think the system, by the way, we must say, has gone. In my ear, it's gone. I don't think there's any, maybe one or two movie stars now, but not a bunch of them, as there was in the 70s, because of the changes that have occurred.
Do you feel like a comedian like Robin Williams can bring more humanity to a role than, say, a dramatic?